Well, greetings and shalom. This is Adrian Scott, and I welcome you to Truth and Testimony, the broadcast. We're continuing our Bible Break series as I'm going through the book of Genesis, and now we find ourselves up to Genesis chapter 8. Now, as I like to do, I will read through the chapter first, and then I will go back and offer a little bit of commentary. As a quick note, I am doing this through the King James Version of the Bible if you want to follow along with that, but ultimately you can follow along with any version you'd like to, or, just read it on your own and then come back and listen to my commentary. I know one thing I want to do is start using chapters on my videos, but I'm still learning. I'm still figuring out how to do some of this stuff. Anyways, without further ado, let's get right into it and read Genesis chapter 8. And God remembered Noah and every living thing and all the cattle that was with him in the ark. And God made a wind to pass over the earth, and the waters assuaged. The fountains also of the deep and the windows of heaven were stopped, and the rain from heaven was restrained. And the waters returned from off the earth continually, and after the end of the 150 days, the waters were abated. And the ark rested in the 7th month on the 17th day of the month upon the mountains of Ararat. And the waters decreased continually until the 10th month. In the 10th month, on the 1st day of the month, were the tops of the mountains seen. And it came to pass at the end of 40 days that Noah opened the window of the ark which he had made, and he sent forth a raven, which went forth to and fro until the waters were dried up from off the earth. Also he sent forth a dove from him to see if the waters were abated from off the face of the ground. But the dove found no rest for the sole of her foot, and she returned unto him into the ark, for the waters were on the face of the whole earth. Then he put forth his hand, and took her, and pulled her in unto him into the ark. And he stayed yet other 7 days, and again he sent forth the dove out of the ark. And the dove came into him in the evening, and lo, in her mouth was an olive leaf plucked off. So Noah knew that the waters were abated from off the earth. And he stayed yet other 7 days, and sent forth the dove, which returned not again unto him any more. And it came to pass in the 601st year, in the 1st month, the 1st day of the month, the waters were dried up from off the earth. And Noah removed the covering of the ark, and looked, and behold, the face of the ground was dry. And in the 2nd month, on the 7th and 20th day of the month, was the earth dried. And God spake unto Noah, saying, Go forth of the ark, thou and thy wife, and thy sons' wives with thee. Bring forth with thee every living thing that is with thee, of all flesh, both of fowl and of cattle, and of every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth, that they may breed abundantly in the earth, and be fruitful, and multiply upon the earth. And Noah went forth, and his sons, and his wife, and his sons' wives with him. Every beast, every creeping thing, and every fowl, and whatsoever creepeth upon the earth, after their kinds, went forth out of the ark. And Noah builded an altar unto the Lord, and took of every clean beast, and of every clean fowl, and offered burnt offerings on the altar. And the Lord smelled a sweet savor, and the Lord said in his heart, I will not again curse the ground any more for man's sake, for the imagination of man's heart is evil from his youth. Neither will I again smite any more everything living, as I have done. While the earth remaineth, seed time and harvest, and cold and heat, and summer and winter, and day and night shall not cease. So there we have Genesis chapter 8. There's not a ton of stuff that I would go back to on this one, although there's definitely a few things. One goes right back to verse 2. Because one thing that does come up is like, where did all this water come from? I know that's a big question. And there's no amount of rain, really, I think, that could attribute for that. I mean, we see typhoons and hurricanes and all these things that bring torrential rain and just mass destruction with it, but not enough to cover the whole earth. Now, part of this does then call to mind, or should have you thinking, just the amount of water it would take to do this, that the amount of destruction and devastation that this would cause. I mean, it beggars the imagination. It really does, of how bad it was at that point to do that kind of destruction. But the basic idea, which kind of ties in verse 2 of chapter 8 there, is it mentions the fountains of the deep. Now, my theory is that I kind of go with is that that's where the majority of the water came from. So this is stuff that would have been subterranean, so under the crust of the earth, and the land fractured, and the water, the fountains of the deep, spread forth from that and shot up into the air and created all this other stuff. There's other stuff it connects to, this possible idea of a canopy that was over the earth of something frozen, because all of that water creates friction in the atmosphere, which would have heated things up, potentially melt that canopy. This is all a theory. And so there's some of the rains that came down, plus the fountains, and that would give you enough water to do that. So I think one basic idea is that prior to the flood, we didn't have on the earth oceans as we see them now. There wasn't anything like the Pacific or the Atlantic. At most, maybe there may have just been seas, things like that. I mean, there were definitely bodies of water, but not what we see today. So I think that's just more physical evidence of the remains of that global flood. And that's another thing. I know there's a lot of, not a lot, but there's some talk, there's some people believe in this idea of localized floods, which just never made sense to me. I can appreciate that they have the idea, but it doesn't make sense to me, because ultimately my sarcastic mind wanders to the idea, well, if it's a localized flood, then just go over there, right? Where the flood isn't. You don't need to build this huge boat and load these animals and do all this other stuff. It had to have been a global flood. That's the only thing that makes sense. And I think when you look at the evidence, the oceans and the changing all that other stuff, that it lends to that. I've always found it coincidental. I can't verify any of this. I'm not, a geologist or anything like that, but I find it interesting when I look at the earth, like from a distance on a map or something, and you can see some of the major fault lines, and they like line up parallel with some of the major mountain ranges. And I just wonder, was that part of it? Was that fault line, that fracturing of the earth that the fountains burst forth from? And as it did so, it pushed the land apart. And that's what formed these mountain ranges. Everything just get piled up. Because I don't think prior to the flood, we had mountains as big as we do now. That's another thing. But this is all part of theory. This is all theory and conjecture. We got what we have here in the Bible. And, at some point, maybe we'll understand more. Maybe more of it will be made clear to us. But for now, we're just doing the best we can with what we have. So that idea of the fountains being the majority of the water, that's kind of point number one. The next one is just an interesting little one. And the ark rested in this is verse 4. The ark rested in the 7th month on the 17th day of the month upon the mountains of Ararat. Well, we know where this region is. And coincidentally, there has been an object found there. Again, it cannot be said with absolute certainty, but I think that there is a moderate amount of evidence to say that this object that has been found there, because it doesn't say like the mountain of Ararat, like on the top of a mountain. If you think of, you have a bunch of water in some sort of, just running off of anything, right? What's going to happen is it's going to run down from the tall things into the valleys, and that's where it'll settle, And so I don't think, if anything's floating in that water, it's not going to land on the top of that mountain. It's going to follow the ebb and flow of the water as it's going down into the valley. And that's where you get the mountains of Ararat, and because it is a number of mountains, and they have found this object right in the midst of this. Now, the other thing is, so it meets basic ideas there that this could be Noah's Ark, the remains of Noah's Ark. But more interesting, the length of this object lines up with the measurements that were given for the length and width of Noah's Ark, that they're very, very close. And furthermore, so that's another piece of evidence. Furthermore, with because I don't think they've necessarily been able to dig straight into it for a number of reasons, but they've done, I don't know if the various, not X-rays, but sonar, ground penetrating radar, things like that, where they've surveyed the site and located deck timbers and apparently, if I'm not mistaken, iron rivets, but rivets anyways. So this is more things. So now you've got man-made stuff here, timbers and rivets, in an object that matches the size of what Noah's Ark would have been in the location that the Bible says it is. Again, I mean, you can't say for certain, but I find it very compelling that the remains of this object very well could be Noah's Ark. And if you want to look for that, you know, Noah's Ark discovered. I mean, there's videos all over the place. You can go check it out for yourself. But just that is an interesting one there. So one other thing that I always found interesting. Now, I don't have an answer for this. I just find it intriguing. And because I don't believe there's anything random that occurs in the scriptures, everything is in there to teach a lesson, to make a point, as an example of something. And so I just always stood out to me the fact that he sent out a raven and a dove. We only hear about the raven once, I believe. Yeah, we only hear about the raven once, and then the dove he sends out, comes back, sends out, comes back with the branch, and sends out, doesn't come back anymore. They disembark the boat. But still, initially, you do get this raven and a dove. Like, what's up with the raven? And just the combination of the two. Because if you think figuratively what the two of those things often can represent, I don't know. I've wondered. Again, I don't have an answer, but it's just an intriguing thought that I've had. Why a raven and a dove? The next point is an intriguing one. Another one that I can't say I have an answer for certain, but I just always found it fascinating. So, backing up just a tiny bit, when I hear the word ark, of course, I always think of two things. Number one, the Ark of the Covenant with the mercy seat, the lid of atonement. And number two, Noah's Ark. And I just find it so interesting. In verse 13, they've got this passage here, at least in the King James, where it says, the waters are dried up from off the earth, and Noah removed the covering of the ark. This is like removing the lid of atonement or the mercy seat, which you would do with the Ark of the Covenant. And looked, and behold, the face of the ground was dry. But it's just this idea of removing the covering of the ark. And I just sounded like Ark of the Covenant rather than Noah's Ark. But however it works out, I just found that choice of wording extremely interesting. Is God making a connection between Noah's Ark and the Ark of the Covenant? Things that make you go, So think about that one for a little while. And I think probably my last point connects to verse 20 here of chapter 8, where it mentions, and Noah builded an altar unto the Lord, and took of every clean beast and of every clean fowl, and offered burnt offerings on the altar. Just this idea that it very clearly mentions clean beasts, clean fowl. So this, I shouldn't need to remind anyone, is well before the time of Moses and Abraham and all of that at Mount Sinai and the giving of the law, that there was already a distinction between clean and unclean animals. And so this, connects to something that I always found interesting. It's, obviously a topic near and dear to me, being Messianic, Hebrew roots guy. Because in our house, my wife and I and our family, we do eat biblically clean and avoid the unclean stuff, which is things like, we always talk about the two big ones because that's what you get in our culture, at least in the Western world, is pork, pig, and shellfish and crustaceans. There's other things as well. Hares, camels that are not clean, ostrich. Again, it's just that idea that long before we had Moses and Abraham or the law given at Mount Sinai, we already had a distinction between clean and unclean animals, which I think, if I'm not mistaken, you can actually find some reference to that going back to Cain and Abel even. So pretty much right to the very beginning, there's already a distinction between clean and unclean. And one of the fascinating things, I hesitate to mention this because I can't remember more details about it, but I remember that there was a secular institution. They wanted to do this study. They were aware of this designation in the Bible of clean and unclean foods, of what was good and not good to eat. And their hypothesis was, okay, well, is there anything to that, right? I don't know if they were trying to prove the Bible is stupid or anything like that, but they just took the idea and it was like, is there anything to that? And when they tested the various animals and made the separation between what the Bible lists as clean and unclean, they found that all the stuff that the Bible listed as unclean was literally unclean. It was the most toxic stuff that we could eat. An example is pig. So far as I understand, pigs don't really have a method of flushing toxins from their system. They just have a couple of pores behind their hooves there, and it kind of seeps out of there, ultimately seeping into the ground that they're wallowing in. Now, the problem is they start rolling around in that, and they just reabsorb it back into their skin. It makes them amongst the most toxic animals that you can eat. That meat is just, highly toxic. I mean, all of these toxins are still in there because nothing's getting flushed out or cleaned properly. And there's this idea of you are what you eat, that when you're ingesting, all this nasty stuff, or you're eating pork, you're getting all of those toxins into your system. What was in that pig system is now you're putting into your system. And this study confirmed that that is the case. It is toxic and it is unhealthy. So I don't know if they were trying to prove the validity of the Bible, but they kind of did. And it just showed that, the biblical author, ultimately God, but whoever put, ink to parchment, they knew what they were talking about all this time ago of what was good and not good to eat. And it all predates, again, Moses and Abraham and the law at Mount Sinai, something I just always found interesting. But basically, on that note, I think I will wrap it up there. If you've made it this far in the video, I thank you for hanging out with me and checking it out. I do pray that this blessed you and you got some insight out of it. Please, I do ask if you can give the video a like if you liked it, share with others, and don't forget to subscribe. One thing I like to mention from time to time in videos is when you're subscribing, I have said this in passing before, but with a little more explanation here. So the last time I checked anyways, when you subscribe to a channel on YouTube, and I'm not sure if Rumble functions similarly, but it may be worth checking that out too, but definitely on YouTube, it defaults you to something called personalized notifications. What happens there is if the algorithms don't line up, you may not necessarily be notified of all the videos that a channel you have subscribed to have posted. I have seen this firsthand with some channels that I am subscribed to. People that have, sometimes the Hebrew roots speakers and stuff like that, but not necessarily the most popular things to say. And I have seen for a fact that they have put videos up and I have not been notified of them. So for those guys, I did go in, and there is an option for you to look at as well, where instead of personalized, the other option is, there's a couple, I think one is no notifications, but the other one is all. So it doesn't matter what that channel uploads. You will be notified about everything that goes up. So if you don't want to miss anything that Ray or I are doing, because sometimes it can be a little iffy with those YouTube algorithms, hit those all notifications when you do subscribe. Long-winded explanation, but there you go. Anyways, thank you so much for joining me. I do look forward to seeing you in the next video. We'll pick up with some interesting stuff in Genesis chapter 9. Until then, I wish blessings to all of you in the name of Yeshua HaMashiach, Jesus, our Savior. And I say shalom and bye for now.